With me today, I have Susan Kenniston, the head of sustainability from Wipro, Scott Atkinson from Heidrick and Struggles, and Ellen Jackowski, the chief sustainability officer of Mastercard. Susan, we started this conversation, in Davos this January. So we worked together and hosted a session about really corporate values and how do we change things. You came from Nike, and now you're sort of in a professional services firm. We've heard from other people here. The CSO in many cases plays a dual role, both thinking about their own sustainability efforts as a company, but in your case, also as a service provider to other companies, helping them through their journey. So talk a little about that transition from a company like Nike to the professional services side and sort of that internal sort of way that you have to manage both priorities.
Yeah, it's a great time to be both involved in the sustainability and the digitization, the transformation to a sustainable world. And so it has been an interesting point of view to see both sides of the landscape. I think it is key right now to actually address both in those roles. And so, really what we're seeing and what was talked about quite a bit, I think Rishi talked about a little bit too, is sustainability today is in the technology sphere that both are addressing. It's really becoming, on its way to becoming an enterprise ecosystem. And so, but we're on that path, we're on that journey right now. And to date, the sustainability leader has been carrying a lot of that load, and a lot of the business stakeholders and the functions have been carrying that load in terms of the data readiness, capturing the data, the processes around that, and then the innovation around that. And so we've been seeing a lot of that happening. And to be honest, the technology leader, the CDO, CIO, CTO, they're catching up on that today as well in terms of their role and advancing that. And so what we're really seeing is those two forces coming together in terms of the prioritization of things happening. And so I think that's the fun today of seeing business carrying it and now the technology leadership bringing that as well. And not just from like a day-to-day changes of data capture processes, things like that, but bringing it up to the strategy level of the company and introducing the importance of the digital inclusion, not digital inclusion as we know it, but the digital inclusion of the strategy and what it means to the business of everybody being on board from sourcing materials to procurement to manufacturing, logistics, and so on. And so that kind of combined lens of the business side and the technology side coming together to really create this transformation. I think that's been the magic of what's happening.
No, it's funny. When we started Techonomy, 12 years ago, we did a session, pretty much every leader needs to be a technologist. And people pushed back and said, well, you have a CTO or a chief digital officer, but really now you have to speak the language, right? You have to understand in the C-suite how to speak each other's language, how to work together. And Ellen, you came from HP, now at Mastercard, so moving from a company that manufactured goods and moved goods around to now, a technology and software company. And again, we've had these conversations around, in Mastercard, every employee has a component of variable compensation that's tied to meeting your ESG goals. I'm assuming that if you're an employee now, you are holding your company accountable to being able to collect the data, report on the data, and accurately say, hey, if you're getting this part of your comp, it's because we've made progress. How internally, did Mastercard think about building these systems so that they could collect and analyze the data and sort of report back to the employee base, on the goals?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here for this discussion. Really excited to be here today. In terms of what Mastercard did, as you mentioned, with our compensation, where last April they made a decision for every employee, all 25,000 plus, for a portion of their bonus to be tied to whether or not we hit our ESG targets for that year. And so we've broken down our net zero goal, our financial inclusion goal, our diversity goals into specific targets annually. And if we hit that this past year, everyone in their February annual compensation statement would see a line item, ESG modifier to the bonus with a percentage and a dollar amount. And that happened for the first time this February. That was, a sea change, a moment where, again, who's on the sustainability team at Mastercard? Everybody. Everybody is compensated and rewarded for their actions in this regard. So now it becomes this question of, well, what am I really supposed to do? How am I, if I sit in marketing or in procurement or in some part of the company, like how do I affect our progress against our ESG goals? So now we're undergoing kind of a process of, after February, when everybody saw for the very first time that number on their compensation statement, we rolled out mandatory training for everybody. Here's what our ESG strategy is. Here are our specific goals. Here are ideas at a very high level of how you can get involved and create action and impact that could be measured. Following that, we're creating specific playbooks for each part of the organization so that depending on your role, you have specific ideas for your function of how you can contribute to that. So back to the bigger question of the data systems underneath that, I think everybody in this space, we've talked a lot about how everything in sustainability, in ESG is continuing to mature at a very fast pace due to the urgency that we all see. And that's no different than the IT systems. So we've undertaken a project that's sponsored by myself, our controller, as well as our head of IT, to basically redo all of our IT systems to be more similar to our financial systems that have the proper controls and data collection processes.
So I think we heard from a couple speakers today, including Melanie, about this idea of finance and reporting and ERP. We heard the word ERP during the IBM presentation as well. And Scott, you work with organizations to fill senior sustainability roles within the companies. Mm-hmm. We're hearing a lot, obviously today, around technology. How much of a technologist does the chief sustainability officer need to be? And how have you seen the requests change over the years about the requirements with the backgrounds that the companies are looking for in their chief sustainability officer?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, to answer the question, I think it's always helpful to have a framing around the evolution of the chief sustainability officer role. And I don't know if any of you are trivia buffs, but here's one for you. Anyone know when we first dubbed the first leader as a chief sustainability officer here in North America? 3 seconds have gone down. Bye, so I'll just answer it. 2004. 2004. So Linda Fisher joined DuPont from the EPA. I'm seeing some nods. And if you go 20 years past, almost, which is where we're at right now, the growth has been significant. Heidrick and Struggles, my firm, did a survey and a research paper on the function a couple months ago and found that over 80% of the Fortune 1000 companies now have a CSO or VP of sustainability or some kind of equivalent leader in that position, which is just amazing. And not only is the number pretty significant, but also the scope of the role, the demands on both of you now. I'm very happy in my role and happy to be sandwiched in between both of you, but not taking on your role. It's so complex and incredible. But this role has now become a position for a true business leader who can drive business outcomes, impact, and also manage risk that's material to the underlying businesses themselves. And so that's the framing around, when you think about technology and does this person need to be a technologist, clearly being able to be data sensitive and being able to leverage data is critical as a business leader. Having the tools to inform and illuminate business decisions is critical in the role. And I will say, part of what Susan and Ellen have to do is not only be the chief, the head of sustainability, but also a technologist. They have to be the chief educator some days. They have to be the chief communicators some days. And I think having a digital technology framework is critical when you're talking to other C-level executives to try and drive business decisions that also align with sustainability goals.
Right, and I think we've talked about it's a horizontal function, right? Because you're working across the organization. So Sue, when you think about your relationship or within a big company, the relationship between the chief sustainability officer and the chief technology officer or the chief digital officer, how does that partnership work, right? How do we start to see the chief sustainability officer is obviously, we heard things like even scope 3, hey, if I need to report back to my customers because it's, they're going to have to report on the services we're providing. How do you see that partnership between the CSO and the CTO working? How does that continue to evolve? What are some of the challenges, of that relationship?
Yeah, it's just such a great partnership, actually. And so, you're really seeing, first of all, them even just acknowledge how hard it is right now to do this together across the whole value chain, how important it is to level up the tech team in terms of, since a lot of the functions have been doing a lot of the sustainability for the last many years, the domain leaders from the business, is to help the technology team skill up in terms of the standards, the frameworks, what is the rigor that's required to do sustainability in technology. It reminds me a lot of, when we shifted financial systems or supply chain systems into ERP or, product systems into PLM, is just that domain expertise. Now really kind of leveling up in technology so they're comfortable with what's required today of the standard measurement systems. So I think, for sure, just, training up together and acknowledging where they're at. I think the leaders being ambassadors together across the company, the technology leader and the sustainability leader, from a cultural change perspective, that it should be in every function and with every leader, and help them onboard, help make sure it's integrated into the strategy. And I think a lot of the leaders, and I love what Ellen mentioned, they're really partnering up to think of it as, two big things. One is a new capital structure. So, not only just kind of reporting out on your built-in in your financial, but thinking about the natural and social capital as structures of just importance in terms of being a responsible business. That's one thing. And then not just from a risk perspective, but there's all sorts of great services and opportunities and new business ventures that are part of this as well. And so I think the leaders are really taking, sustainability and digital opportunities together in terms of new business models and things like that. So I have a lot of empathy today for the CTO, CDO, CIO, because they've got a lot to do to kind of game up their team and structure and clean up their stack, to be very honest. And then also to be helping the business really be a partner in that. Lastly, I love that Ellen mentioned that, partnering now with the CFO and the CRO. So we're seeing the 4 leaders come together in terms of the accountability and the change. And so the CDO, CTO, CIO is right there with them. So there's a lot of change in leadership and how it's coming kind of to play out right now. So it's pretty exciting.
So Ellen, why don't you sort of elaborate on that relationship in the C-suite when you think about, again, now being at 2 different companies in this role, thinking about how the CTO, the CFO, and yourself interface, interact, and has that changed? Is it different? We talk about that, climate, sustainability, ESG used to be in CSR, right? It used to sit in a PR function, not in a core, strategy and part of the business. Like, how has your role evolved and how you interface with your peers in the C-suite?
Yeah, a couple of ways. So one, just to address what's going on with our partnership with the CFO's office. About a year ago, our CFO's office recruited a new role, ESG controller, reporting directly into the financial controller of the company who reports to the CFO. And the fact that they recognized that we needed a team there, so there's an ESG controller, it has several people part of her team. They have been tremendous partners to me and my team, particularly as the regulations are unfolding across Europe. We're waiting here in the US for the SEC. So having that tight connection, that partnership and real resources dedicated in the CFO's office to sustainability, to ESG, has been really important. When I think about the governance structure overall, both at HP and what we've built at Mastercard, is the governance structure spans the organizational structure. So it literally mirrors for ESG what the CEO's organizational structure looks like. So every single part of Mastercard's organization has a leader tapped for sustainability and ESG. They have specific ownership of responsibilities to make sure their part of the organization is delivering on our overall ESG strategy and goals that are material and relevant to that part of the organization. So we have quarterly meetings as a steering committee. There's working groups that sit underneath that meet more regularly with the leaders who are running the programs across the company, and leveraging those learnings, the intelligence, the benchmarks, the progress, the lack of progress, the obstacles, all of those things, bringing those forward in that governance structure at the working group level, and then of course at a more steering committee level has been very important.
So Scott, when you hear that and you think about the organizational structure of where a CSO sits, they have dotted lines reporting everywhere. They're working across the organization. From now the companies coming to Heidrick to fill these roles, are you starting to see a trend? Are they all ultimately going to report into the CFO function? Every company I know right now is slightly different, but we hear a lot about financial reporting and all of that. Probably not where a lot of people who went into sustainability originally came from, right? They may have had, an environmental or biology background. Now it's more of a financial background. Talk a little about what you're seeing sort of on the front lines of working with these big corporations.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of CFO work, and so it was very rare that a CFO didn't report to a CEO. And in this function, it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure. And part of the fun for us is instead of having what might be more of a transactional discussion around an executive recruitment process, when we engage with our clients in the CSO, in the sustainability and ESG space, it is a consultative process. I mean, we are having conversations around benchmarks of analogous companies. We are taking in inputs on what is material to their business, and we're also thinking about, what makes sense within the context of the business in terms of the structure. So it's a long way to say, Josh, no two company is necessarily structuring this in the same exact way. I think there will be some more uniformity as things continue to mature and progress in this function. But yeah, I don't know. One thing I will say is over the last couple of years, we've seen a buoying up of this role reporting into the CEO or the COO because it's a board level sustainability and ESG is a board level conversation, right? And so to have the function or the leadership team buried further down the ranks doesn't necessarily serve the best interests of the board and the C-level executives.
So in closing, we've been talking about a Techonomy digital transformation again for 12 years. We see now the conversation usually is about digital sustainable transformation, right? They want to go through a digital transformation, but really thinking about sustainability. Are you getting at Wipro more and more requests that as people are trying to build systems and go through their transformations, that sustainability is at the top of their list, right behind just sort of this transformation?
Yeah, I think that we can't keep up with all the requests. It's number one priority, maybe number two of every client that we're working with right now, and it's for all these reasons in terms of disclosure requirements, risk management opportunities, and so where we did digital transformation previously, it is digital and sustainable, and so really combining those two things in terms of the opportunities to find workflow efficiencies and optimization in your value chain to pay for some of what you want to do around transformation for sustainability in other ways, whether maybe it's reporting or innovation, things like that. So across every industry, every client is looking for this right now. I would go back to a little bit of, I think that first of all, Rishi did a phenomenal job of just talking about what does this look like in terms of instantiating digitization and innovation. We're seeing that. So the other thing that's happening with the digital transformation, kind of going back with the ecosystem and thinking about Rishi and folks like him, is the other thing that we're really seeing is, we aren't at enterprise solutions. And it's one of the biggest pain points that we're seeing with our clients right now. We're on the journey, right? So, you know,
I think we were talking maybe
yeah.
someone was still using Excel spreadsheets to put data in. They're not building ERP level systems.
So we're on that journey, and I think it's just recognizing that as, you know, the leadership. It goes back to the CTO and the CSO partnership. Is, you know, there's funding that's required to help get us into that kind of enterprise scale, because there's a lot of pain in the ecosystem right now. And so what you're seeing is kind of this creative partnership where, for example, this morning I was on a call with one of our key partners and, you know, doing the product roadmap for sustainability. And, you know, IBM, same thing, just working with them on their product roadmap. And I think that that's what it's going to take from a digital transformation perspective. You know, at some point, this should be how we do business, right? And these should be enterprise systems. And the data should be flowing through, and we should trust it. And it should have the rigor that we can put into our financial systems. We're just on that path, right? We're getting it, you know, basically digitized for an enterprise scale. And so I think that that's what everybody's trying to do, is reduce the pain, prioritize, knowing that we're kind of investing on these enterprise scale solutions.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's give a round of applause for Sue, Ellen, and Scott.